I am so excited to have Ean here with me. Ean Tafoya is a local hero. He's put leaders' feet to the fire through grassroots organizing and really carrying the weight of communities who are surviving the most challenging environmental times that's happening right now in our communities. And so I'm so happy to have Ian here with us. So he's going to tell us a little bit about the work that he's doing, how he got involved in this world, and what he hopes to do in the future. Let's talk about creating a life and country we're proud of together. I'm your host, Alvina Vasquez. Welcome to Alvina Talks Shift. So I want to hear, you have just sprung up as a key leader in this state, and I want to hear about your journey. How did you get to be one of the most influential environmental justice activists in the state?
Oh, that's so nice of you to say that. I mean, I think I'm just one of many people who are doing the work. I grew up in Denver, Colorado, and I grew up in West Denver. My mom was a social worker. She got a first-time homebuyer program. We moved to Cole in North Denver, just right by a train interchange. You could see a smokestack from our front door. But I still don't think I really understood what environmental justice is. My birthday is Earth Day, so I was an environmentalist. I love talking trash and sustainable food justice work and bike lanes and busing. And I got pretty active as a student at Metro State University, go Roadrunners. And I actually got sent to a class for a class assignment to a Parks Board meeting when I was in my early 20s.
Oh, interesting.
And the Denver Post actually wrote about this when I was running for mayor, which was pretty cool. And that meeting kind of changed my life. I was invited to testify for the first time. I said, why don't we have recycling in the parks? They told me it really wasn't a priority. And I was like, what? We were bringing composting to a rare campus. Recycling is bare minimum, and so we started collecting petitions. That was like the first petition drive I ever did. And we came back every month for like 6 months with petitions saying like, look, like there are Denverites who want this. And at that time in my life, all I did want to do is go drink a beer and slackline in the park and do my homework. And it was just like something simple, But it also happened to be their annual conference or meeting for the board. And they invited me to stay. And so all of a sudden I was with all these leaders appointed from the mayor and stuff and city council. And I saw this process. And fast forward a few years later, I was working in the mayor's office. I was working in city council. I actually ended up being the vice president of the Parks Board to champion those issues.
Wow.
That I was about. And I went on to work for 3 branches of local government. I spent time as a teacher. So I had a lot of civic background. I ran for council when I was 28. And really, that was in opposition to the Central 70 expansion through our community. And, my family wasn't living in that part of town 50 years ago when they built it the first time, but we certainly were there the second time. And they were taking hundreds of homes just half a block away from my mother's house. And so I started learning about the Clean Air Act and the National Environmental Policy Act and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And we started getting active, and that turned into more activism around Suncor, among other things. And eventually it became a job. And I work for Green Latinos, a national environmental justice and conservation organization. I have the honor of being the first state program, and now we have 3, Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado, and there are more on the way, and it just feels really amazing. And I guess my journey has taken me to the very top of the halls of Congress and the Capitol, and working with and against at sometimes movement from the government that isn't good for our communities. I had a chance to chair the state's Environmental Justice Action Task Force, and I was elected by other environmental justice leaders across the state. And so, I'm really grateful that people have entrusted me to do that work, but it requires a lot of studying, a lot of door knocking and phone calling and so much more.
Let's dive into the difference between environmental justice and conservation, because environmental justice has evolved into kind of I would say, a leading environmental, cause or goal. But it's different than conservation and what a lot of not the brown communities are working on. So tell me the difference between the two.
Well, I think conservation is something our community works on too, but maybe we approach it differently. I think historically, conservation was about protecting the wilderness, the sources of our water and the headwaters, for example, and the areas around that to protect our water and the wildlife corridors and so much more, because of course, we're in a balance with the earth and we need to have the animals just as much as the animals need us. So it's a reciprocal relationship that we're trying to live up to. Now, environmental justice might be an example of for where I grew up in West Denver, where we got our first new park in 30 years, Cuatro Vientos Park. That's still conservation, it's still public lands, but who gets access to them and who doesn't is often where that issue aligns. And then I think environmental justice has other layering effects. Many communities can't afford lawyers. Many communities don't have the expertise, or they're working two jobs. We have huge wage gaps. And then when you pile that on top, you have industrial polluters that are contributing to the negative impacts for their public health, which is costing them money, school days, their ability to save for housing because of healthcare costs, and so much more. And there's different facets of environmental justice, but I think one of the biggest pieces in my mind is that there are communities who are speaking out,
Yeah.
who do want change, and the government isn't listening to them. The polluters in the government have spent 100 years colluding to cause these harms. And so that's where the justice issue in my mind really comes to the top, is because they're named disproportionately impacted communities here in Colorado, because not only are they disproportionately impacted by pollution, they're disproportionately not having power in the rooms where power are making these deals.
Well, I think that's why I'm so proud of you and the work that you're doing, because you are a lot of times in the room and you're invited in the room, which is different than fighting your way into the room, which I know you've also experienced.
Yeah.
But I want to congratulate you, because the IRA, when your anniversary is coming up, you were a big part of that in Washington, D.C. Tell us about that experience. What was that like for you?
Well, I couldn't be more proud. And I want to shout out the Sunrise Movement in particular, and the Green New Deal I see as a source of this investment, right? Shifted terms. We do that in communications, right? Sometimes a narrative gets co-opted and we have to switch it, right? Green New Deal became a powerful tactic for those who wanted to be divisive about climate action. But I personally flew to Washington, D.C., or not Washington, D.C., excuse me. I flew to San Francisco, and I marched with Sunrise activists from across the country, hundreds and hundreds of us, for days, taking over the DNC. There's a very famous video of Kamala Harris marching with her band. They had to go a different way because we were occupying the space. And I had a chance to speak. Andrew Yang came and spoke to us. Bernie Sanders' campaign came and spoke to us. Tim Ryan, who I actually was really impressed. I think that guy should run the USDA. I got to be real honest with you. Had great ideas around regenerative agriculture. And I got my turn.
Yeah.
And I got to tell my story about running against corporate interests. But we didn't give up. We came back and we passed ballot issues here in Denver. I've worked on a lot of ballot issues around the environment. And at that time, we passed the solar panel and green roof ordinance to help with the heat island and energy production.
Yeah.
And at that moment in time, I had a kind of a sinking feeling. I'm here with all these Democrats, and here I am being a direct action oriented person. And I was like, am I sacrificing my career here? It's worth it. It's worth it. And then when I came home, the Green New Deal conversation and the Sunrise Movement, we were taking it to the Capitol, to the state of the state, to the city of Denver, to the Congress members. And then as we saw a change in leadership at the federal level and a movement, and through the campaigning, honestly, because they hadn't had a climate question in like 20 years, they had an entire day where everybody that was running for Democratic side spent an hour on it. It was questions that were brought up even in the two parties in debating against each other. I mean, that's huge progress for our communities. And so when Build Back Better passed, I mean, is there everything I love in it? No. And that's a bummer, because that's how things tend to go. But there's a lot of money. And how do we make sure a year later that our communities are building it, designing it?
Yeah.
The facilities that are creating the asphalt and the concrete are living up to their obligations under their permits and environmental justice. Who's making the money? Who's benefiting? That's the point. And a year into IRA, I was really fortunate as senator. He put my staff and I out on the internet, on his Twitter, announcing Build Back Better. And we didn't always have a great relationship, and I think that shows that you can make bridges for the betterment of our community.
I think that's another skill that I think I've seen you do. Like, you've had really challenging conversation with state and national leaders, and yet you still hold the respect where you can be invited in the room. You're able to build those relationships and bridge that, because it's so hard to get things done. It's a lot harder. I know people get things done. They find a way, but It's a lot harder to do when you're not invited to the room. So congratulations on all your work and getting all that respect and being in those places, because we know you're carrying the weight of the communities that don't have a voice, that don't have the job to be an advocate. They're working minimum wage jobs, or they're working, jobs that they can't just pick up and go to the Capitol every day. And I think that's something that we don't recognize, that paid organizers are holding the weight of those that don't have the time or the mental effort to even know what is at risk in their air and the water. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. And let's talk about the way that you've been able to insert yourself and run for office and really keep pushing our leaders to do better. What inspires you? What gets you through those tough days when you're working, 14, 15 hours a day and you're having frustrating conversations with leaders, or you're running a campaign for mayor, or you're running for city council? Where do you get that gumption?
I don't know. I've never been one to believe in you have to wait your turn politics. Because I'm like, get out of the way. We need to get this done. Like, let's get this done and we can move on to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing that we need to. And the low hanging fruit. There are a couple things I think I do for my mental health. I think when I was running for council, I actually was seeing a therapist at that time to prepare, truthfully, to prepare for what that looked like. And we came up with this concept, and I'm actually writing a book called Jury Duty on Tax Day Running for Office, because I got jury duty on tax day when I was running for city council. And that's kind of the introductory kind of, story, the forward of like, hey, this is what it looks like. Nobody wants jury duty. Tax day sucks. And you're running for office and it's ups and downs. But this is a chapter in the book I'm working on. And it's what I did. I talked with my therapist a lot. And you have to create this like a battery, like a reservoir in your brain. And when you're getting the positive feedback, you put the good things in there.
Yeah.
And when you're on the down low, right, you're riding the sine wave, you can pull from that battery. But if you use it all up all the time and you don't do anything to restore it yourself, then it's like one in, one out. And those are, in my opinion, those are some of the individuals who are constantly seeking praise in politics and are, it is something I've seen in the work that we do. And I think the other thing is, and I actually did it this morning, I went and walked with my partner and my dogs down by the river. Go to the water. That's what I was always taught in my culture. If water didn't heal, why do you cry?
Yeah.
If you were carried in water in your mother's womb for 9 months, it heals you. And so, go to that space, build a relationship with your local water, clean up the trash on the way. It's those simple things that like reconnect you to the earth. And I think you have to go there. And then lastly, I would say is like, feel free to talk to people. You have to have elders that you can go to. You can have to have youth you can go to. You have to have different groups of people. You have to call in all directions when you're looking for help. And I think as you grow older, you know who those people are. Your ride or die people that you want to go reach out to.
That's awesome. And it's amazing the work you've done in Colorado, but you mentioned Texas and New Mexico, which right now, I mean, we're experiencing some crazy weather.
Yeah.
What is happening? Tell me more about what's happening in Texas. What's happening in New Mexico?
Well, Texas and New Mexico and Colorado are in some of the top producers of oil and gas in the United States. And so we're actively exporting what is causing us harm. It's impacting our air quality. It's impacting our water quality. It's drying up our rivers, both from the climate action, but also the amount of water we're using, the climate sways. When we talk to rural communities, for example, in communications, people are talking about it. They're just using different words. When you're talking about crop loss as compared to climate change, people understand what that means.
Yeah.
When we're getting later frost, earlier frost, these heat waves, these droughts that are impacting us. Similar issues in urban settings with no access to green space, air quality, polluters, and violators. And then on top of that, in all these states, in the West in particular, you have tribal interconnections as well. And so there are certainly huge issues around tribal consultation and the rights of First Nations in this state and in this country. And I think all of these things kind of interplay into these spaces. And this is an area of very sacred places. My ancestors come from northern New Mexico, southern Colorado. If you've ever heard of Mesa Verde, to your listeners, You're talking multi-story buildings built thousands of years ago that are still standing. And we're afraid that the fracking earthquakes are going to tear down our culture. This is a reality. It's happening in southern Colorado. So I think some of that's happening. But what I will say also is there's a rising movement of our community with Green Latinos, of people who want to come together, network together, make change, and pass the laws. And we are passing great laws around solar energy, among other things, in particular in New Mexico. And in Texas feels a lot like when I go into a rural community, I think, and they feel so alone. But you're not alone. I felt alone. When I first met Green Latinos, I was like, wow, there are other people like me. I'm used to being the person in my family that's like too much. Like, we don't have to recycle everything. You don't have to ride your bike everywhere. Like, and you're finally around people, I think, who have that similar mindset to you.
That's awesome. I love that thought of, and I think that happens to a lot of us that are in politics and organizing, is we're always the ones that are too much. Tell me about you have really connected with people in community and heard really strong stories about their health and their environment and making those connections. Because I think sometimes we don't make those connections. We don't assume that the brown cloud that we wake up in every day is what's causing asthma or cancers or these other issues. How do you how are you connecting at that grassroots level to elevate the issues for folks that have 100 things on their mind, paying their bills, getting the kids to school on time? How do you connect with them on these issues?
Yeah, I think two of those things you're naming right there are simple best practices in community engagement that you can overcome. As I mentioned, I was a teacher. I spent the first part of my career as a teacher. I worked my first job at the Museum of Nature and Science. So you're talking science education, right? And public health education. So I really see our role in a couple fold, of course, supporting frontline communities, coaching local governments on how to reach communities, in particular Spanish speakers, monolingual Spanish speakers that live here in Colorado. But we also do civics education. Nobody teaches you,
That's
even
true.
if you have a political science degree, how the Air Commission works or the Public Utilities Commission works. Nobody tells you if they're paid or if they're not paid. We also do, like I said, public health education, explaining what benzene is. What is PM 2.5? What are the laws that protect you so that you know your rights? Know your rights is something that matters just as much in criminal justice law as it does in environmental justice law. And I think lastly, financial literacy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of disinformation, intentional disinformation to the Latino community around climate action, who can afford it, who's it for, organic food being more expensive, among so many other things. And so we go to communities, we travel. We have a slogan here. My Colorado team is, if you need us, we will come. And I've traveled to all 64 counties. I've been on massive toxics tours where we go hear what their issues and try to connect those to solutions. And we educate them and we feed them and we give them stipends for coming, gift cards often for coming. We have childcare for them. We educate the youth as well. I think all of those pieces are incredibly important. And sometimes when we're doing efforts for rulemakings, we'll be in more than one at a time. So we'll do back to back. So a mom could take off a half day, come earn $200 with Green Latinos, learn about an issue, decide to take action. And we all know some people's rents are going up $200 a month this month, and you don't know where you're going to get it. And so I think if we can find ways to do that, it's like a politician, right? They're paid to be civic. We should find ways to subsidize civics with other people because many hands make light work. We need to support people sitting on boards and commissions, just as an example.
And you brought up the intersectionality of healthcare, the economy, and how all of these big political issues are all connected to health and environment. Let's explore that. Tell me more about that.
I think that's how I was raised in an indigenous household and Chicano household, that we're connected to the earth and it's just connected to us. And we're not the only culture who says that, right? But I think the dominant culture of consumerism is not. And so we have to find ways to return people to that. That's why we take trips to take kids and adults to go camping, to get them to connect to it. It's why we get people into urban gardens and we try to get them to grow their own food. And I think when you do that, you can ultimately understand like what those impacts are. And it is dollars and cents. It is kitchen table math when you're talking about how am I going to pay for a babysitter because my kids are having bloody noses? How much money am I spending? And how much is it costing a county on Medicaid? So people will talk like, oh, an industrial facility provides $2 million in tax revenue. But if you're paying $14 million in Medicaid costs out of your county, it's actually a net negative for your community. And I think putting that cost to it makes a lot of sense. And like I said, going to all counties, I've worked with people on all sides of the aisle, and that's what we try to do. Because at the end of the day, conservation is about people. I hear some people who say they want to put conservation back in conservative. I've heard that from people on that side who organize in those communities. And when I'm in Westcliff riding horses, and the people out there are telling me, yeah, I want solar panels, but I just don't know how I'm going to pay for it. That's the exact conversation as I hear from somebody in West Denver. And so then what do? We take that to the rooms, the policymaking rooms, and we say, tax incentives aren't enough. They need down payment assistance.
Yeah.
If you want to get people out the door with these products to make a change, we got to subsidize it up front. not hope that they make more than the $10,000 or minimum deduction.
Right. Yeah, that's so interesting that you can make that connection for political leaders and they can make it themselves. Ian, we know that your environmental journey has taken you to the White House several times. I want to hear about that, and I want to hear about the conversations that you've had about how the funding gets trickled down into the states.
Yeah, going to the White House was an incredible experience. Going to the White House multiple times, unbelievable. I had a chance to be there for the signing of an executive order mandating all federal agencies to take on environmental justice. Is so amazing. And then the time that I've been there, and we meet with the Council of Environmental Quality, which is the highest advisor for environment for the president, and the interagency working group of all these agencies that are set on distributing 40% of this money, environmental justice 40, Build Back Better funds coming to the communities. I say, it's great you're working together here. Are you guys coordinating where I live?
Yeah.
And they said, well, we're not so sure. And so I came back and I had conversations with the EPA director, Health and Human Services, HUD. And it turns out that in February, they've decided to also have an interagency working group.
Oh, wow.
I think this is being mirrored all across the country. And so now my big thing over this year is they've been meeting for 6 months now. How and when does the community get involved? And the leadership from our people most impacted come involved with helping decide where these monies are moving. Now, some of the money moves to the states. They can apply. Some of the money can move to the federal, the local governments, and they can apply. And then others of it comes to community-based organizations. And a lot of them require multiple relationships, more than one nonprofit working together, community group working together. And so we're really struggling now because they're coming out so fast of how do we get prepared to apply for a grant? I have to have a federal ID. And so there's technical assistance that people have to be offered. And Green Latinos has a program we call the Frontline Accelerator Program, where we're trying to pair those individuals with the resources they need to get their audit, to get their ID numbers, to move forward on it. I think one of the things that's still really frustrating about it is it still feels overly burdensome. That's what we're hearing from community.
Yeah.
They're reimbursement models. So you have to actually have your coin in your pocket and spend it, then try to get it back from them. And what I know in these reimbursement models is you send it to them, then they go, oh, you didn't get this part right. And you're in this back and forth, and you're like, I already spent the money. And that part can be really challenging. It's similar to what I was talking about with down payment assistance versus financing off of taxes later.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, getting a rebate, I rarely apply for those rebates.
Yes.
I mean, I barely do warranties. So the I guess it's unrealistic. I mean, is that a tool to keep the money, do you think? Is it an underhanded way to like not actually do the reimbursements, is to just make it super challenging?
I think some would make that argument. I don't think that's the intention of the federal government. I just think that that's the way things have been going for a long time, and under-resourced communities haven't been given the skills to prepare themselves to be in the track to be able to absorb those funds. And I think one of the other things is public finance is just so fascinating. All this money we're spending, these tax credits, where it's going. I sit on the Colorado Public Banking Institute. I'm a firm believer in public banking as an opportunity to take these federal funds.
Interesting.
It is a financial institution owned by the people that makes sense. Literally makes sense, and it makes sense. It stops us from sending 30% of our money to Wall Street and allows us to reinvest in our communities on infrastructure. And so I'm a huge believer in those kinds of issues. And anytime you can do instant rebates, it's the right answer. Because then people are going to make that choice and not think twice.
Exactly.
It's kind of like when you make a bus free. People are like, oh yeah, I'll take the bus. Like, when it's price competitive to everything else, in the end, that's going to speak to all of us.
What do you hope to see? We have 2024 coming up. What do you hope to see the national dialogue on environmental justice being among leaders that are running for office, including the president?
I think that it's about continuing to do the work. Build Back Better isn't the end. We know we need more resources for our community. We know we need to make sure that money is going out the door. I'm reading interesting articles. I read one the other day from Washington Post, and they were talking about earmarks. And for the listeners, earmarks is your congressperson can say, I want to fund this project. I want to fund this project. Well, they hadn't had earmarks for a while. So they've been doing earmarks again. And as a result, the overall pool for the Clean Water Act portions of the Build Back Better agenda are shrinking. And we have way more demand than even the money we put in. So when I talk to senators that are in place now, they say, what's bill number 3? And what's bill number 7? This is going to have to be iterative work in order for us to restore our community. I hope that people will talk about climate migration. I think at the federal level, immigration reform is so clearly important, and we're only going to see more individuals migrating as the center of the earth around the equator begins to heat up, and we're having massive swings in the environment, and people are going to immigrate northward. And we need to have a plan for that isn't putting up razor wire and harming people. This is a human rights issue. And I come from a culture, we all do. Migration is natural.
Yeah.
My big thing is when people migrate is I want them to volunteer when they get here. I'd love if they're moving inside America, I hope they register their car. I hope they go to the library and rec center and they build the community, right? I mean, we welcome people who want to be part of the community. I think one of the things that frustrates me, and Denver's one of the fastest growing cities in the United States, is that people are like, it never used to be litter like this. And people go, well, it's better than where I came from. And I'm like, well, it's worse where I live because you're here. So what can we do to change this, right? When somebody's like, oh, I'm so frustrated about how much trash in my neighborhood is, and they blame on housed individuals, but they walked past it 10 days in a row, we have to take some personal responsibility in protecting the water, you know?
Yeah. Well, our time is up. That went by so fast.
I know, yeah. These 30-minute shows go by quick.
But thank you so much, Ian. And then I guess we're going to have you back when you have your book out.
Yo, I would love to come back here and talk about my book. There's a lot of great pieces in there. And again, jury duty on tax day. Imagine these individuals stuck with me at jury duty. We're all doing our taxes like it was homework, and we're like, "What do you have an answer for number 3? What's A7?" And then I was walking around, and I'm like, "I'm running for Denver City Council District 9," and these people in jury duty are like, "Oh my God, he's gonna come talk to me next."
Is that the feeling?
It is, I mean, it is, but. And a lot of people told me not to go to jury duty, and I go, what kind of person running for office gets out of jury duty?
Yeah, no, you got to go to jury duty.
You got to go to jury duty. And I got 2 bus passes, so I can't really complain about that.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching Alvina Talks Shift. Please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, engage, empower, evolve. If you liked this episode, or if you want more content like this, go to alvinatalkshift.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.